Hi, and welcome back. I hope you guys had a great Thanksgiving and you're ready to workshop. So, as you'll see this week, we are doing our poetry workshop and also completing the poetry exam. So, you'll notice that the exam will become available tomorrow or Monday morning, and it'll go until Friday night. So, in addition to that, you will be doing your week 15 discussion, which I see someone has already started. Dawn, good job. But if you go to the discussions, you'll notice that this is kind of a wrap-up discussion post. I know we don't usually have discussions during workshop weeks, but this is the real kind of last discussion post that you'll be doing for this class. And you're basically just going to be talking about what was your favorite thing to write this semester and why. And also tell us a little bit about how you grew as a writer. Of course, you're going to be doing some of this in your reflection to me, but that won't be something that your peers will read. So just imagine this as being kind of even a rough draft pre-writing for your final project reflection, where you talk about the things you learned and the ways that you grew so that you can kind of share that and reflect with each other. So going back here, what I really want you to focus on for the test and for your workshop is the week 11, the poetry terms, but also this handout, the 6 temperaments of free verse. Now you'll notice on your last discussion that a lot of you, I kind of picked out areas that you could improve or areas that you were doing particularly well with your poetry in these 6 temperaments of free verse. So make sure you study these before you take the test and then use this language in your comments for each other, and that'll help you expand the things that you say, because I know a lot of times with poetry can be very short. We might have an instinct, especially if we're used to reviewing essays and longer pieces as we've been doing, to just write a few words about what the poem is doing as a whole. But think about the fact that poetry is important on the line level and the word level, right? It should be the best possible words in the best possible order. So think about each word, each line break, each piece of punctuation as a part of the art, as a part of the sound of the piece. And so look at these 6 temperaments when you're doing that. The first one, of course, being sound, as we were talking about. So everything about a poem kind of lends itself to its sound. The sound that the words make, the assonance or alliteration, makes a beat often to the lines. So he repeats the word blackberry, as it says here over and over again. Blackberry, blackberry, blackberry. Sounds like almost like a galloping. It sounds like a movement. So think about the sound of your poem on that level. And you may read each other's poems, and kind of try to shut off your sense of meaning, and then you can hear the poem a little bit better. You can hear the sound of the language itself, because that's important when we talk about poetry. Number 2 is the imagination. So basically, poetry doesn't simply stick to the facts. It extends past the specific incidents of the poet's life. We talk about the imaginary garden with the real toad in it, as Marianne Moore says. So art rests on imagination. Is the writer kind of taking themselves beyond kind of telling a story or saying something very simply? Is, or in a cliche way, could they expand this with more imagination? The third one is story. Don't be confused with story in an actual fiction piece or creative nonfiction piece. It should not and does not have to always be very explicit what the narrative is of the story. And my poetry is very lyric, and oftentimes I have to kind of ground it in a story some way by putting a little bit more in there to kind of help the reader make sense of the images that I'm using. So basically, little snippets for us to hold on to, it says here, like the red feather, or kind of a continued image throughout. Is the writer doing this? The next one is language, the strangeness of poetry. So are they sometimes when I'm critiquing another poet's poetry, I'll circle a word and I'll say weird this up. So, you know, you might be using kind of really regular language to say something which might not help the reader feel the feeling that you want to give them, because the language will be just so familiar. But if you take that same feeling, so for instance, if you're talking about sadness and you're kind of talking about how the rain was falling down on the roof, which is very kind of regular language. But you want to kind of give that same feeling of rain falling. You might think of something like the droplets skittered across the roof, you know, leaving tiny trails of liquid. You know, I'm just saying this, but think about how you can weird up your language. And be attentive to that, as it says. Voice, this is something important. The speaker in the poem is not always the poet. So even if you're using I, don't automatically assume that that I is the poet. Sometimes we use artifice. We put on a different I. We put on a different person that is the I in this. And also think about the you, because the you could be a specific person, or it could be a more vague kind of universal you, and which is often hard to do. So think about the way that the writer is using both the I and the you in their poetry. Oops. And then the sixth one here is form. And so that's the shape, the way, think of how the white space of a poem is like a canvas, right? So we can kind of, the way that we arrange our poem, the number of lines, all of that kind of lends itself to meaning and sound, and even the visual aspect on the page. If you notice how this poem, right, has the quatrains, the 4-line stanzas, and the short lines. Some poems have very long lines, some poems are prose poems. Is the poet really thinking about their form along with the other aspects? And if you look at a poem this way, you should have more than enough to write about when you do your poetry critiques. So if we go back here, you'll notice that you have your workshops and your discussion post, and then your poetry exam. And then you'll notice we only have one more week. And your chapbook is due the week after that, but you'll have 1 week left to kind of watch the video lecture, start preparing that, and to do your final blog post. So again, I've made these poetry workshops into discussion boards instead of blogs. So it looks like all of you have posted your poems so far. I will get your comments to you by the end of this week so that you can have plenty of time next week to start revising your poetry. If you have extra time, hopefully you've already been working on revising your fiction and creative nonfiction essays. But remember, I'm always here. You can write me with questions or thoughts that you have, and I hope you have a great week.